Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day/night number 2 of the Musical Ethics Lab 1. I'm Christopher Williams. I'm the artistic director of this project, which we've been working on with the Trondheim Jazz Orchestra for the last week or so. We had the first chats and concert last night. We had a blast. There's another concert happening at 8, and right now we're offering a roundtable discussion with two musicians, Amalia Dahl and Henrik Nøstebø from the orchestra, and philosopher Matthias Solli from the NTNU. I'm sitting here with my colleagues Josh Bergerman, philosopher from the University of Vienna, and Caroline Gatt, anthropologist at the University of Graz. We're working on a research project called Musical Improvisation and Ethics, musical in brackets, in which we work over 4 years with experimental improvising ensembles as case studies for thinking about the improvisational aspects of ethics in a broader sense, not only in music and art, but in life in general, and all of the many practices that we engage in as human beings. So we gave a little song and dance about that last night, and we won't repeat it. Rather, we'd like to get into conversation directly with our guests, whom we are very happy to have here. I will pose the first question to Henrik, who's a trombonist in the orchestra.
Rather mic like this.
And it goes like this. What have we been doing for the last week?
Ooh. I mean, from the beginning, we've been, from day one, been treated like a fixed group. Like we came here as the Trondheim Jazz Orchestra, and at least the feeling was there's been like a dual process of finding out what we are with each other and to each other at the same time as trying to dig into these exercises and to generate material for the concert. So there's been like a kind of chaos of different formats somehow and like roles.
What do you mean by roles?
It's just like Josh asked now how it's been to be filmed so much. Like I've never been filmed as much in my life. It's like a Hollywood preview somehow. And at this point, like by now, I don't really, the cameras are just there. It's not really some nice guys behind the cameras, so it's not really a bother. Sorry, what? Yeah, I'm losing my track completely. It's like.
Can you describe what you've been doing personally, musically, and how, if it differs from the way you normally work with your projects and bands?
So, yeah, like I mentioned before, for me it's hopefully without sounding arrogant, but it's like it has been like revisiting a lot of kind of techniques and work methods that I was quite active with 10 years ago. Like this kind of looking at the group, listening to recordings and trying to either make exercises yourself to break your patterns, or being in a larger group, improvising and trying to find something and trying to So it's been a weird, like I was really researching heavily myself for a number of years, like in this kind of way somehow. And then lately I've been going more for, I know a lot of aesthetical parameters have been established already, like I know more how I want my music to sound like. I think now it's more like more the act of doing repetitively more than I don't like break it up into small pieces as much as I used to, I think. So it's been interesting to like revisit this way of working, and also to like inside of the ensemble, some people have a lot of experience with so-called free improvising and others have less, like also with playing with large groups. But for me the obvious thing is I don't at all feel like I've graduated from these exercises that I can just roll in and like check the box. And yeah, it's definitely not successful every time, even though I feel I've done it a lot before. Maybe it's harder because I have done it, played more exercises like this before.
One of the themes that we have in this project is that research and communicating research isn't purely this traditional academic exercise of just like observing through a microscope and then writing papers, but the artists are as much a part of the research process as we are, and the concerts are as much a part of the dissemination as our written publications will be. So you just mentioned research process there, so could you maybe tell us a little bit about what research is as an artist? How do you research?
I mean, for me, it's maybe the core has been to like play music, listen back to it, being unhappy about stuff, and then trying to find ways of getting it closer to what I was imagining. And I think I've had like a quite strong belief in what I've been doing, like it's never been like existential, like I want to quit playing because it's so bad. Like that part has been quite steady somehow, like the belief that if I keep doing this, it's gonna be good, and that like I am good in the best case. But then also being quite strict with myself, like listening to something and like, why is this sounding horrible, and what can I do to flip it around? I think that's also with the trombone, which is like a horrible instrument in many ways. Like there's so much horrible trombone music, and I've played a lot of horrible stuff on the trombone, so that's also been, for me, the trombone has been very central, like trying to crack, because it's such a primitive instrument. So like trying to desperately make it more flexible has been like a 15-year process by now, which I feel I've reached quite far with, not like graduated either, but yeah, so for me it's been like I used to listen to every concert I played, like the day after. On tour, for example, I would listen on a train the day after, and just like carving out what I liked, what I didn't like. So I was quite methodical in that sense. And then I've been going between periods of like really needing to open things up, being super bored of what I'm doing, and then like finding some kind of freedom, and then being bored of that thing again because it establishes it as something else that you keep repeating. So somehow it's been like a process of widening and narrowing, and finding ways of achieving that.
I have a question for Amalia. So Amalia plays the alto sax. Is that correct? Yep. And on the fifth day, so halfway through this week together, we had a review day, right? So we had 3 days of rehearsals with interventions that Chris introduced to the group. And on this fifth day, we spent a few hours asking questions about like the different parts of our lives. What is ethics in your own experience and in relation to your musical practice. And you mentioned something on that day, which was that you don't necessarily only play music to like because you want people to be comfortable, right? You want to provoke with your music. And I was really wondering if there was any of the interventions this week, any of the tasks that you worked with that sort of helped you work with that, and or not, right? And if you could describe one of these interventions and how it worked with that wish to provoke with the music.
I don't know if I always want to provoke either. It's a balance, of course, and I think what I meant was also that people don't necessarily need to like my music, like also Henrik talked about yesterday when we had the Q&A. But I think that I have been a kind of provoked myself during these interventions, or I have been put into settings that I'm not usually going into by myself. And it was, what was I thinking of? For example, I've tried to it's hard to explain, but sometimes not to just react in my intuitive way, because I also have learned that, for example, Henrik likes to for things to evolve slower, or just stay in the sounds for a longer time than I do. And when you work then with a large ensemble, it's important to not just I cannot just do my own thing all the way, but I can do it in my places. And also when we did a trio thing where it was the drums and the bass and me playing, and I was supposed to be less heard, and that was just not the usual way of playing with bass and drums, and it was really hard.
Could you explain maybe how you got, like what the papers were and how the process of getting to that?
We had an exercise where we made scores with papers. Maybe you should explain it, Christopher, and then I can explain why I was in the role.
Subverted.
Yeah.
Well, so I proposed a potpourri of different ideas and concepts and scores and exercises over the course of this week that were designed to make ethical processes more visible to both the musicians and to us, the researchers. And one of those things was a sort of kit for making music. It's not really a score, it's not really a piece, but it's a simple set of different kinds of papers. Just normal A4, A3, A5, A6. And people adopt a family of papers and they make a kind of mosaic with the papers nested within each other in ways that touch on relationships between the musicians, different degrees of presence, different degrees of transparency, different alliances with particular materials or people, that sort of thing. And it generates situations that would very rarely come up spontaneously in an improvisation, but that get the musicians into spaces that can become very productive, actually. And one of those was this, we called it the inverted Ornette-Coleman trio, where you had the alto saxophone, the bass, and the drums, but instead of Amalia playing Ornette-Coleman right up top and sort of leading the band, she was underneath the bass and the drums, and the bass was up top. The bass was the most present in this trio, and it's a totally counterintuitive dynamic, I think, in some ways for the musicians, but they found really interesting solutions to that, and that's the background for this particular exercise. So please tell us more about how you felt when you were being submerged.
Yeah, it was just really hard. It was really hard to find a role, and we tried out some different ways. I actually think the first time we did it, it went I liked what I did, and I just tried to. I think it was Bjørn Marius' paper was blue with a lot of holes, small holes. So I imagined that I just were coming up, popping up through the holes, and imagined that and played that, and it. I think it worked well. But then we tried to recreate it, and then it was hard to do the same thing. And that's maybe how it is with improvised music, and you cannot always know what the others are going to play. So to recreate can be difficult. Yeah.
Before you talked about how you don't always want to go with your intuition, and I would like to know a bit more what you meant.
I always want to go by my intuition, but I've tried to just control it a bit. Because because everybody needs space in this big ensemble, and I would like to play all the time because I want to have fun. So I have actually tried to not go by my intuition all the time, and try to maybe play a little less and listen more. Yeah, because by intuition I always want to join everything around me. But it can also be great to let some other people do their thing and hear what they come up with if you give them some more time.
I'm also really curious that when you said that you saw the blue paper with the holes and you imagined yourself popping through. So while you're playing, is imagination something that's present? Is it before? How does it, where does it feel? Where is it? I've put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's sometimes before playing, but it's also often during playing. I think that I told Josh when we had a talk that for me it's often like talking, that I build up my sentences while I'm speaking. I'm not always sure before where it ends, so I speak and I imagine the next word just before I'm saying it, so almost in the same time. But also when we have been working so much now, I have started to maybe think more before I play, and that also that is in connection with what I just said about listening more, and also trying to not just play the first thing that comes to mind, but maybe try to imagine something new. And that I do before I play, but other things come while I play. Yeah.
Thanks. It's interesting you mentioned language there, because Matthias is a philosopher, but he studied jazz saxophone. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of work on, I guess, the linguistic aspects of music, of jazz.
Yeah. I have been collaborating with Jon Pål Indeberg and Erling Aksdal, which many of you know, and they are the teachers here at the jazz department, and they have this special emphasis on the oral way of learning jazz. They're not so interested in talk about improvisation. That's not any thing to talk about. It's about how you learn the musical language. That's their focus. So I've been collaborating with them and studying their the method, and try to unpack the philosophical implications in this way of learning jazz music. And I find it really interesting in many ways, because it's a way of learning that has emerged organically in the informal jazz tradition, which is an oral tradition. So it was just the way young people learned, to just listen to music and imitated the music and to learn by ear. And then the guys here at the jazz department had taken this informal way of learning and put it into the institution as a way of focusing on the musical language aspect. And last point from my point, and then I've tried to follow that perspective. What happens if you view improvisation from this point of view, like it's a musical language unfolding between the musicians? Do we see, or do we get some other aspects out of the analysis compared to if we view it as a social, as a mere, as a just a way of interacting without the language aspect? I think it's a little bit different emphasis. So that's what I want to ask you. That leads up to what I want to ask you. In what sense do you experience your playing here yesterday as an unfolding of language? Is language relevant? Is it the musical language you're exploring, or not?
It's a lot different than language in many ways, but what's similar is like the theory of the conservatory here, and what you just said, the way you learn language and you learn music is possible to compare. There's a lot of talk about language all the time with music, and I also just did it like building up a sentence, and it's just a way to kind of describe the process, but I don't feel like I play and talk. It's not the same things I'm saying. And I also talked with Josh about that. That I think with words, but when I think about music, I feel it's not thoughts, it's imagination. I can imagine melodies or structures, or like in free improvisation, I can imagine what it will sound like, but it's not thinking in the same way as when I think about things with words. So it's I also think there's a huge difference. But what about you, Henrik?
I think in this setting that maybe personality would be a more fitting word for the interactions.
Okay.
And that of course there's similarities of how like the material people use, which is, I guess that's what you usually, when you talk about language as an improviser, is more about, people often mean basically the sounds you've developed and the way you put them together. And that's, of course, that's very personal, but it's also like a toolbox that you develop more and more, and that's more and more available to you somehow, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
And in this setting, like, of course, we play different instruments. We probably make different choices, but it's really, I don't think it's because I play the trombone and Amalie plays the saxophone. It's just more based on our personalities and our lives, and I mean what we listen to, of course, too, but even less that as well. So
you're saying that it's more apt to say that is a collection, more a palette of sounds that you can use, that you can, so to speak, respond to this situation by using this sound, or yeah.
I mean, I think it's impossible to separate also, because, but like language, if you talk about word-based language, then I felt for some years that when I spoke English, I was more extrovert, which is kind of weird because it's my second language. But I think it was because I started speaking English more actively in a period where I was like I moved far away to Sweden, started school, met musicians from different countries, started touring internationally, and all of that would happen in English. Whilst I was quite, I'm still like have a strong introvert side, but I'm definitely more social than I used to be as a kid, I think. Like more like adapt or whatever. So that was a weird time. I think now it's kind of evened out a bit, but it was really like I had an easier time hanging out speaking English. And I think that can be translated to music too, like sometimes the personality doesn't come out even though you have the language available, if that makes sense. Like it's not an automatic thing, and the setting you're put in to really affects how you can use your language. Like with you, like I know the feeling of like being subdued or like getting enough space or not getting enough space, or it really affects how your personality can come through.
Yeah. And that when you have had these exercises that you, as you said, your habitual way of playing was a little bit interrupted. You have to do something else because of the exercise. It was they were not. They took you in another direction. So I just want to ask, when you are faced with this challenge, what resources in you do these exercises evoke? What kind of resources are you in touch with when you have to respond?
Yes, right. Should I answer or if you have something ready?
But it really depends on the exercise. It has been, we have done a lot of exercises during these days. Yeah, it's a bit difficult. You ask what resources?
One way to answer could be, I just use my experience. I have a lot of experience, you can say. When I'm faced with these exercises, I have my experience. I can respond. But then, what kind of experiences are you? Evoking. Yeah. Because I'm a little bit. I'm asking because we also try to encircle these ethical aspects. So I guess some of this has to do with musical experience, but also has to sort of interhuman communicative capacities in play. Would be my guess, but difficult. But
I mean, that's flipping it a bit, but the reason I really enjoy the like solo, duo, and trio formats is that everyone can play absolutely all the time if they want to, and there's still somehow space, and there's still like very clear, like you can flip it around in a second. And in a large group, it's very like you have to surrender more to the situation, I think. So I think like if we play the trio together, Amalia could fully bring her personality and I could fully bring mine. Whilst in a setting like this, like it is like you feel socially responsible for the others on stage, and which can be like, it's a tricky balance because you don't want to play out that too much, but you also want to make sure that everyone has the space to express themselves. So if your intuition tells you to play like completely all the time, then of course that will affect some people. So you don't do it. So I think the technique maybe is like, for me, it is quite tricky to I've definitely played some things this week that I wouldn't have played if I could choose freely. And you have to surrender to the exercises somehow. But it's tricky again because you're also representing yourself completely in a way. Like you can't, like if you're playing someone's piece and it's even though like here you have a solo and there's maybe a written backing, then you can, if it doesn't work, you can blame the composer. But and you can, in this setting, it's like we are 9 with Christopher. We are 10 people, and it's like 10 different personalities. Not sure if that answered your question, but
yeah, that brought up sort of, I guess, an interesting ethical aspect, because we've been thinking a lot about the different relationships between the musicians, but then also these, I guess, that tension between how a structure can be both a limit of freedom, but can also give you freedom by sort of suggesting a direction to take the possibilities. So how much are the relationships between the musicians, are they a structure in itself for you? Are they a limit, or do they free you into certain new things?
The relations between.
The relationships between the people you're playing with, or even other things which are in the room, perhaps.
If it limits you, or if it frees you.
Yeah.
It can be both. It can be both limiting and freeing you, and I don't know if, or it's like, for example, when you play with an group or an ensemble that plays loud music, it affects you. I've been playing some noise music with the only 3 other people, but I definitely have to play louder and playing higher notes to be heard, and that, yeah, of course that affects my playing. But in this band, for example, we also have a violin and a clarinet that is that can't play as loud as me, and that affects in that way that I have to make space enough for them to also be heard. And I think that often in some sort of jazz group, you can choose to overrule the bass player, for example. You can choose to do it, and you can choose to give space, and both is okay, I think. But you have to be aware that you are giving space to the others, and that everybody will be heard also, because that affects your. It's also a social thing. And afterwards you have to look the bass player in the eyes. So if you just is overruling all the time, I don't know if you will be so good friends afterwards.
Apropos the bass player and the violinist, I'd like to start passing a microphone around to you in the audience. What about being overruled, Björn Marius and Ada? And what's the how have these interventions we've been doing put you in new situations with respect to your usual roles in the band?
New situations.
Yeah, in other words, all of the stuff that we've been doing together, it gives you new opportunities, but also maybe shuts others down with respect to your usual role in the band. And I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah. I'm used to being overruled as a bass player. I think no, I'm not. But in some sense, it's bass player or bass, and also violin strings in general is a fairly soft sounding instrument, and there's always this balance, I think, about the like overruling or whatever is it's a sound in its own, and I think it's a sound that can be accepted in many ways, and if I don't play in that kind of sound, it will sound different, even though I'm soft. And I think as long as it's dynamic in a way, that it's always moving, It's never a constant this or that musically speaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So, but when you're in a situation in one of these exercises, or when we find ourselves in a certain situation in the band where you're asked to lead, or you're asked to overrule other people, how does that make you feel?
Can you do you have an example from
the inverted
when it
Ornette
happened?
Coleman trio.
Yeah, for example. Yeah.
When you become Ornette Coleman.
Yeah, and you
What
also
happens?
you talked. Yeah, what happens? I think that was interesting because it's fun in a way, but it's also new and kind of unfamiliar for me to be on top. It's not that. I think it's not that I haven't engaged in that kind of musical landscape, but as you mentioned, when that happened spontaneously the first time, because I think which Amalia also referred to, I think a couple of days before we did we tried to do the inverted Ornette Coleman trio, because I think it happens from one of these papers you were talking about, right? Because I got a paper that was on top of it of everybody else with a kind of transparency, and I think it's interesting. Why is it interesting? No.
Well, maybe we could get some help from Ada, because
maybe.
She's been in
Save me.
So one of the challenges we've had in the last week has been finding space for you, Ada, because acoustically speaking, you're overpowered by a lot of the instruments here. I felt like we've succeeded to a degree in finding those spaces, but I wonder if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think we've been working on it, so it's been more awareness in the band about the fact that they have to make space for me, and also the way we've been working on some of the interventions the point has been to make space for me, and it's been I think it was a bit difficult at first to be on top, because I know everybody else then have to play softer, and it really defines what the others can do. So, but it's a good practice for me as well to have to be the leading voice sometimes. But when we play really loud, then it's difficult, because it's not so much I can do. I can play really high, and I can't do so many variations in the sound when we're really going for it, everyone.
Yeah, I can add something.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the wrecking ball, which we talked about. Oh, it's secret. Okay, it's a spoiler. Okay, maybe I should. Spoiler alert. Cover your ears. No, but yeah. Should I say something about it? Yeah. No, because it's an interesting aspect of. I think I said in a situation. Should I explain the wrecking ball first? Yeah, okay. Let it out. No, the wrecking ball is kind of obvious in a way, I think. Yeah, it's the idea is that somebody is playing. An amount of people is playing fairly softly, and somebody else's role is to cover that up. That's the basic. That's why it's called the wrecking ball. And I think I said during this one of the rehearsals that I can never be the wrecking ball, and there was mentioned, yes, you can. And wrecking ball is also about attitude. It's not only about the sound of the instrument that you make. It's more like, yeah, it's a physical aspect of how you play. And a drummer, for example, would maybe be very physical or have big gestures. And I could probably be a wrecking ball, and that's interesting in a way. Yeah, it's interesting. because it's being a soft instrument, it's kind of limited, but you can go around that and like explore how to unlimit yourself, if that makes sense, you know.
I was wondering if we should open up to the audience if anyone has any questions they'd like for anyone on the panel.
I have quite a few in my book here. Yeah. I was wondering about the purpose. When you discuss ethics, I think it's all about the purpose of something. And I'm wondering, in what kind of way is this project about a purpose? What's the higher purpose? Is it beautiful music? Is it about democracy? Is it about respect? How we treat each other?
Thank you for asking that, right? Because this is something that's going to be occupying us a lot, because we've said we are going to show how what happens in musical improvisation also is something that can speak to other spheres of life. But I think the thing that we're looking at is, especially in relation to, Matthias, your point about language, right? There's been lots of discussion, and when you're hearing the music, there are so many places where the sort of the automatic or the sort of my intuitive understanding of what ethics is sometimes gets thrown out of the window, right? So, for example, being the wrecking ball in this case is not unethical, right? Because it's actually creating this dynamic that works because of the wrecking ball. Or, for example, if you need to take space, it's not necessarily, for example, an imposition in the way, for example, an imposition would be, let's say in a democratic situation where you have a meeting, right, and you have people who are talking over each other, then you don't understand anything, right? So in a conversation sort of situation where somebody is constantly covering up somebody else, then there you'd say, you know, maybe that's unethical because you're not allowing space for others. But because the way that musical instruments, and I'm learning as I go along, right? But my reference is also song, right? The way that voices and personalities and sound work together might offer, and this is the purpose, right? It might offer a way to think about ethics which is slightly shifted from the current sort of like obsession with individuality, actually, right? So how do you make space for these dispersed or collective forms of relationships? And not only with humans, but also, so one of the things I'm particularly interested in is like the way that what I've understood of how you've played, you're constantly listening not only to each other, but to the way the room responds to you, to the way that the materials of your instruments. And in a way, those are forms of conversations with the non-human, the material. So there's so much possibility for looking at how you listen and propose, right? Because it's not only just listening, it's also, I have something to offer, right? Which is very exciting. And if we can come to a way of sharing that it offers proposals, let's think about bringing people and things together in a different way. Does it sort of answer a bit?
I would just add as well, there's also, you might want to say like a meta-ethical element. So we're not just looking at like, okay, what's the most ethical way to play? What's the most beautiful way to play? But almost the question of why is this considered ethical? Why is this considered a good way of collaborating? Why is this considered a beautiful way to make music? And definitely one thing we've been discovering is as we explore, you know, experimental music, and that people make certain, you know, aesthetic choices based on ethical values. So if a group prizes democracy, if a group prizes, say, a particular way of collaborating, you know, the music is going to sound a particular way, they might have less control over the way that it sounds, but more input. Other groups might prefer to have, you know, these sort of stronger structures. This also is, you know, an ethical value. It's a valid choice that they make, but that also requires the musicians to perhaps take on different attitudes, to subordinate their own habits, or to develop new ways of working. So that's part of the reason why we're not just working with one group, but we want to work with several groups, and to bring these different musical cultures together to find out, well, how do these values actually emerge? So in that sense, the study is more of a case study in how cultures emerge, negotiate, and find values which are expressed aesthetically as well as morally.
So, just curiosity, is there different ethics in music and real life?
This is something I'm very interested in pushing, this idea that actually ethics and aesthetics is not a separate realm. You know, the aesthetics of an era will reflect the value. So we spoke a little bit last night about the development of sort of high classical music in the sort of, which coincided with an era of the consolidation of nation states, the emergence of bourgeois capitalism. All of these things came together with the printing press, this ability to actually send the scores around for orchestras to play, the theatres being built in all the towns across Germany and Central Europe and everywhere. So there's this really historic element where the ethical is actually bound up. What kind of society are we is expressed in the kind of art that we make. And of course, it's not, in that time, it wasn't just these people making art for very obvious reasons of power. These forms of art have, come down to us historically, and people are now looking at, well, what was suppressed and why, and we're sort of realizing that these folk traditions actually carry often very different ethical values. So there's this historical aspect of where you can't really separate what's ethical and what's aesthetic, or what the society values as a whole, from how that's expressed in the artistic world.
I have a less sophisticated footnote to that answer, and that is, yes, it should be beautiful music. Of course, we're reinventing the beautiful at every stage in this process, but this for me is I'm heavily invested in this project as a composer. I'm not composing in the sense that, one usually pushes around sounds and frames them within a musical work, but I'm composing with people, both in the sense that people are my materials and I'm composing at the same time with them. And I want the concerts to sound good, whatever that means in a particular situation. And I think they do. And I hope you agree.
I'm not sure I'm ready to phrase it, but I'll try. Because you talk about democracy, you talk about letting other people's voices be heard. You talk about being on top, all these human and also democratical references. And I just wondered, because it's, does it have to be democratic, or could it just be listening? Because but when Amalia and Henrik they talk about, okay, it's hard because I have to stop myself all the time because my intuition is to play all the time, which we all can recognize. But when you work with your compositions and with your music, your övelser. Yeah, thank you. Isn't it more about listening than about democracy in a way? And did you have to, do we have to go there to democracy, or could we just work on listening and being attentive and, yeah.
So that's where my history of interest in this work comes precisely from that, because I used to work with Friends of the Earth International, which is this environmentalist group, and they were so determined to listen to each other. They're imagine 76 different groups from around the world, and they had all this way we're going to make our policies, which in a way, this is their understanding of democracy was listening. Let's listen to each other and write policies which have everybody's voices in it. But they were not skilled at listening to difference. So if somebody shared something which was not recognized by a lot of the others, then that difference just sort of vanished, right? So what I think we're really excited about with working with these three different groups is that there's precisely this, that they are skilled at listening to something which they're not necessarily expecting, right? So it's not only just listening, but listening expecting to not recognize immediately, right? And have to make that effort to say, okay, this is not what what is this? And instead of just ignoring it or not even realizing that there's something different, taking that time to say, okay, I have something that I want to give. So not vanishing as a person or as an instrument, but at the same time being able to recognize difference. And I think that this is something we ask together, because this might be my assumption, maybe after all, because this is one world of contemporary improvised music, actually it's not enough. Maybe the difference is not quite different enough. But I think you're absolutely right. It's how to listen without vanishing. Right? And that might be the aims of some types of democracy, but I think democracy is very narrow. It has it's part of our historical context, and we have to take it into account. But it's flawed in many ways, right?
I think what you just said, how to listen to the unexpected, is that's a very important issue here in this book.
How do you teach it? Because I know that you, from talking, I know that you teach, right? Is this something you can teach?
Yes.
I told you teach.
Sorry. Sorry. I've given away the secrets, but is it okay for me to ask you, like, so can you teach how to listen to the unexpected?
You can work with it. You cannot learn people to do it if they're not interested in doing it. But you can like you can work with interventions. You can rehearse it. Of course. I've often wondered if does it mean that, you know, by being a good improvisational musician, does that mean that you are a good listener in life? And I'm not quite sure of that. But I really believe you can learn to listen and appreciate the unexpected, and that's what I teach. Yeah.
I apologize for the silly.
No,
I
it's
was
fine.
so taken
Yes,
over by your question.
it's very fine. I'm just kidding with him. Yeah.
We have time for one or maybe two questions if they're short.
Yeah, this question is for Josh and for, what was your name? Sorry? Matthias. Because you guys are quite interested in natural language in music, right? Do you think that natural language is particularly related to improvisation, or is it kind of a way of understanding music generally?
I think it's particularly relevant for improvised music, but also relevant for music in general, because the jazz tradition, as you all know, emerged as some kind of we can call it folk music, which is part of the everyday life, and and this aspect of it has this quality of spontaneous music making along with others, which then can be institutionalized and utilized and enhanced and so forth, but it has this connection with this spontaneous musical dimension. Of course, all kinds of music has this. All kinds of music must evoke that capacity in the human, because otherwise it wouldn't be the music wouldn't swing, or it wouldn't be any fun to listen to. Yeah, but I think it's particularly relevant for the improvised. I don't know what you think.
All I guess would add to that, so running out of time, is I suppose with natural language, so this is a particularly human capacity to speak with natural language. Like other animals communicate in all kinds of really glorious and complex ways and all kinds of information, but I think humans are unique as a species of using language to find meaning, and using that model and looking at, I guess, how improvisers play, comparing it to, say, natural forms of music like birdsong, for example. They convey meaning, particular, I guess, ideas which communicate amongst the species, but they're very specific. They're quite limited, even in the most complex ones, rhythmically complex and melodically complex, are often in meaning quite narrow, whereas the music and expression that we find in improvised music or in all music, you know, there is something about us being language animals, I think, which is definitely tied into that. I'd love to talk about that a bit more. We can maybe continue in the bar. You can definitely listen out for the music tonight. There will be a lot of meaning and expression. I have no doubt about that.
So thanks for everyone for showing up. The gig starts in half an hour. See you then. Thanks to all the guests, of course.